The snow fell softly that Tuesday afternoon in December, each flake drifting down like a whispered prayer. Margaret Sullivan sat on the park bench, her cream-colored wool coat wrapped snugly around her, watching the world slow down under winter's gentle touch. The city square had transformed into something almost magical, the kind of scene that reminded her why she'd always loved this time of year. At 42, Margaret had built a successful consulting firm from the ground up. Her days were filled with meetings, strategic decisions, and the constant hum of ambition. But lately, something had shifted inside her. Success felt different than she'd imagined it would, back when she was starting out. More hollow somehow, less warm. She'd come to this park bench to think, to breathe, to remember what it felt like to simply be still. That's when she noticed the child. A little girl, perhaps 4 years old, stood several feet away. She had blonde, curly hair that peeked out from under a small knit hat, and she wore a brown wool coat that looked slightly too big for her small frame. In her mittened hands, she clutched a worn teddy bear. The child's cheeks were pink from the cold, and she stood there, perfectly still, watching Margaret with wide, curious eyes. Margaret smiled gently. "Hello there," she said, her voice soft and kind. The little girl took a tentative step forward. Then another. Her small boots crunched in the fresh snow. When she was close enough, she looked up at Margaret with an expression that seemed far too knowing for someone so young. "Ma'am," the child said quietly, "I don't have a mama. Can I spend a day with you?" The words hung in the cold air between them. Margaret felt something shift in her chest, a tightening that spread warmth through her entire body despite the December chill. She looked around the park, searching for an adult, a guardian, someone who belonged with this precious child. But the park was nearly empty, just a few people hurrying past in the distance, their heads bent against the snow. "Sweetheart," Margaret said gently, leaning forward, "where is the person taking care of you? Your daddy or your grandma or maybe a nanny?" The little girl's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't cry. "Mrs. Henderson is over there," she said, pointing to a woman sitting on a bench across the way, her face buried in her phone. "She watches me while Daddy works. But she doesn't see me." Not really. Margaret's heart broke a little. She knew that feeling. Being looked at but not seen. Being present but still somehow invisible. "What's your name, honey?" Margaret asked. "Emma," the little girl replied. "Emma Grace Patterson." "That's a beautiful name," Margaret said warmly. "I'm Margaret. Margaret Sullivan." Emma took another step closer until she was standing right next to the bench. "You look like you might be nice," she said simply. "And you have kind eyes. My grandma used to have kind eyes like that. She's in heaven now." Margaret felt tears prick at her own eyes. Without overthinking it, she patted the bench beside her. "Would you like to sit here with me for a little while, Emma? We can watch the snow together." Emma's face lit up with such pure joy that Margaret knew she'd made the right choice. The child climbed up onto the bench, her small body settling close to Margaret's side. They sat there together, two souls finding unexpected comfort in each other's presence. "Tell me about your grandma," Margaret said softly. And Emma did. In the unhurried way that children have, she spoke about a woman who baked cookies that were always slightly burned on the bottom, who sang old songs while doing dishes, who never minded when Emma asked 1,000 questions about everything and nothing. "She used to tell me stories," Emma said, hugging her teddy bear close. "About when she was little and about magic, and about how the snow was made of wishes from children all over the world." "That's a lovely thought," Margaret said, looking up at the falling snow with new appreciation. Maybe she was right. They talked for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Emma asked Margaret about her work, and Margaret found herself explaining her job in simple terms, realizing as she did how much she actually loved what she did, even when it felt exhausting. "Do you have children?" Emma asked suddenly, with the blunt curiosity only small children can pull off without offense. Margaret shook her head. "No, sweetheart. I never did. I was always so busy with work and then, well, time has a way of moving faster than you expect." "That's sad," Emma said matter-of-factly. "You would be a good mama." "I can tell." Something in Margaret's chest cracked open. She hadn't realized how much she'd needed to hear those words, how much she'd wondered about the path not taken, the life not lived. "You know what, Emma?" Margaret said, making a decision that surprised even herself. I have an idea. If it's okay with your daddy and with Mrs. Henderson, maybe we could spend a little more time together. Would you like to go get some hot chocolate? There's a cafe just across the square. Emma's eyes went wide. Really? With marshmallows? With as many marshmallows as you want, Margaret promised. They walked over to Mrs. Henderson, who seemed startled to suddenly be accountable for the child she was supposedly watching. Margaret explained her offer calmly and kindly, and within minutes, she had the nanny's phone number and instructions to call Emma's father, Daniel Patterson. The cafe was warm and smelled of cinnamon and coffee. Margaret and Emma settled into a corner booth, 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate before them. Emma's had a mountain of marshmallows that made her giggle with delight. My mama died when I was a baby, Emma said suddenly. Her voice matter-of-fact, but tinged with sadness. Daddy says she was beautiful and smart, and that she would have loved me very much. I'm sure she would have, Margaret said gently. And I'm sure she still does, from wherever she is watching over you. Do you think people can see us from heaven? Emma asked. I think, Margaret said carefully, that love doesn't end just because someone goes away. I think the people who love us stay with us in all the ways that matter. Emma considered this while sipping her hot chocolate, leaving a marshmallow mustache on her upper lip that made Margaret smile. They spent 2 hours together that afternoon. They drew pictures on napkins. They made up a story about a bear who wanted to learn to ice skate. They talked about school and friends and favorite colors and whether dogs or cats made better pets. When Margaret finally called Daniel Patterson, she found herself nervous in a way. She hadn't been in business negotiations, worth millions of dollars. Mr. Patterson, this is Margaret Sullivan. I'm at the cafe with your daughter, Emma. Mrs. Henderson knows we're here, but I wanted to speak with you directly. There was a pause. Is Emma okay? She's wonderful, Margaret assured him. She's right here, happy and safe. But I wanted to... Well, this is going to sound unusual, but Emma asked me today if she could spend time with me, because she doesn't have a mother, and I found myself saying yes. I wanted to ask if perhaps with your permission I might be able to spend time with her sometimes, as a friend. Another pause. Then, where are you? 20 minutes later, a man walked into the cafe. He was tall, with kind eyes that looked tired, and he wore a suit that suggested he'd come straight from an office. He spotted them immediately, and Emma jumped down from the booth. Daddy! He scooped her up, holding her tight, and Margaret saw the fierce love of a parent doing their best alone. When he set Emma down and turned to Margaret, she stood and extended her hand. Margaret Sullivan, she said. Daniel Patterson, he replied, shaking her hand. Thank you for calling me directly, and for being kind to my daughter. They talked while Emma finished her now cold hot chocolate. Margaret explained how they'd met, how Emma had asked her question, how something in that moment had felt like the universe rearranging, itself in small but significant ways. I'm not trying to overstep, Margaret said carefully. I have time now. I've spent so many years building a career, and it's been wonderful. But I'm realizing that success means something different than I thought it would. And Emma, she reminded me today what matters. Daniel's eyes were bright. My wife died 3 years ago, he said quietly. Brain aneurysm. No warning. And I've been trying so hard to be enough for Emma, but I know I can't be everything. I can't be her mother, no matter how much I want to be. You're doing beautifully, Margaret said firmly. That child is loved, and she knows it. That's everything. But maybe, Daniel said slowly, maybe she could use someone else in her corner too. Someone who sees her, someone who chose her, even just for an afternoon. And so began an unexpected friendship. Margaret started joining Emma for hot chocolate every Tuesday after work. Then it became dinners on Fridays. Then occasional Saturday adventures to museums or parks or anywhere. Emma's curious mind wanted to explore. Margaret taught Emma about constellations and how to bake bread from scratch. Emma taught Margaret how to slow down, how to find magic in ordinary moments, how to see the world with wonder again. Daniel watched his daughter bloom with this new presence in her life, and he found himself grateful beyond words for the woman who'd said yes to a child's simple request on a snowy December afternoon. On Emma's 5th birthday, Margaret gave her a special gift, a leather journal. For all your stories, Margaret explained. The ones you make up, the ones you live, the ones you want to remember. Emma hugged her tight. Will you help me write them? Every single one, Margaret promised. Years would pass and Emma would grow, and Margaret would be there for all of it. First days of school, lost teeth, skinned knees, science projects, middle school dramas, high school graduations. And through it all, they would remember that December afternoon when a little girl asked, a stranger, a brave question, and the stranger said yes. Because sometimes the family we need finds us in the most unexpected ways. Sometimes kindness is just saying yes when a small voice asks for love. Sometimes a single afternoon can change the shape of two lives forever. And sometimes on quiet winter evenings, Margaret would look at Emma and think about all the things she'd accomplished in her life, all the deals she'd closed, all the success she'd achieved. And she'd know with absolute certainty that saying yes to that little girl in the snow had been the most important thing she'd ever done. The thing that made all the rest of it matter. The thing that taught her what it really meant to be rich,